He threw her in the highest tower of Hemlock Keep, condemning her to freeze in the dark. Garrick thought he was disposing of a useless, defiant Omega who threatened his brutal image. He never suspected that the fragile woman rotting in his dungeon was the true, ancient sovereign of his lands, and the only cure for the curse slowly tearing his soul apart. The air in the great hall of Hemlock Keep was thick with the scent of pine, iron, and suffocating fear. It was the winter of 1432, a time when the northern reaches were ruled not by laws of men, but by the primal, unforgiving codes of the lycanthrope Pax. Garrick Mercer, the newly self-crowned Alpha King, sat upon a seat of forged iron, looking down at the trembling lords and ladies of his court. Garrick was a behemoth of a man, built like a fortress, with eyes the color of shattered ice and a temperament just as cold. He had not inherited his crown. He had ripped it from the throat of the previous king during a brutal uprising. But power taken by force is fragile. To solidify his reign, Garrick needed the blessing of the Moonstone, an ancient relic housed deep within the catacombs of the keep. Legend dictated that only a true ruler, standing beside their fated mate, could make the stone ignite with ethereal light, proving their divine right to rule. Garrick cared little for prophecies, but his court was deeply superstitious. His chief advisor, Lord Edmund Fairchild, a man with a silver tongue and a heart full of venom, had warned him for months. Without the stone's blessing, sire, the southern Pax will rebel. You need a queen, a strong, ruthless alpha female to stand by your side. Garrick had agreed. He had organized the great mating ball, expecting the moon goddess to pair him with a warrior. Instead, the universe played a cruel trick on him. Her name was Genevieve Caldwell. Genevieve was an Omega. In the brutal hierarchy of the northern reaches, Omegas were the lowest of the low, relegated to servants, caretakers, and afterthoughts. She was an orphan, raised in the scullery of Hemlock Keep, her hands rough from years of scrubbing stone floors, and her clothes perpetually smelling of lye and wood smoke. Yet beneath the soot and ash, Genevieve possessed a quiet, haunting beauty. Her hair was a cascade of dark chestnut, and her eyes were a startling, piercing violet, a genetic anomaly that most dismissed as a peasant's quirk. When Garrick had walked down the grand staircase during the ball, his inner wolf had violently surged, clawing at his chest. The scent of rain-washed jasmine and sweet cedar had hit him like a physical blow. He followed the intoxicating scent, not to the high-born ladies dripping in jewels, but to the shadows near the servants' quarters. There, holding a tray of empty wine goblets, stood Genevieve. The bond snapped into place, undeniable and absolute. The Alpha King's fated mate was a scullery maid, an Omega. The silence in the great hall that night had been deafening. The murmurs of disgust from the high-born alphas and betas had burned into Garrick's pride. He saw the sneer on Edmund Fairchild's face. He saw the doubt in the eyes of his generals. A king paired with a weak, subservient Omega was a king destined to be overthrown. Driven by ego and a desperate need to project absolute strength, Garrick made a catastrophic choice. Instead of accepting the mate the goddess had gifted him, he rejected her in front of the entire court. "I will not be bound to a weakling," Garrick had snarled, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I am the Alpha King. I forge my own destiny. Take this creature out of my sight. Lock her in the North Tower. Let the cold claim her, for she is dead to me." Genevieve had not begged. She had not cried. As the guards seized her arms, dragging her away from the warmth of the hearth and the man whose soul was meant to mirror hers, she had merely looked at him. Her violet eyes held no fear, only a profound, tragic pity. It was a look that would haunt Garrick's nightmares for months to come. He threw her away, locking her in a windowless cell high above the clouds, exposed to the biting drafts of the ruthless mountain winter. He announced to the kingdom that his mate had tragically died of a sudden illness, and that he would choose a high-born alpha as his new bride. But Garrick Mercer was a fool. He had locked away an Omega, blinded by his own arrogance, entirely unaware of the blood that flowed through Genevieve Caldwell's veins. Genevieve was not a nobody. She was the last surviving descendant of the House of Whitmore, the original, sacred royal bloodline that had united the Lycan Pax centuries ago. Her parents had been murdered in a political coup when she was an infant, and she had been hidden in the scullery for her own protection by a loyal servant. The violet eyes that the court had mocked were the unmistakable mark of the Whitmore line. More importantly, the moonstone in the catacombs did not respond to mere alphas. It responded only to the blood of the Whitmore kings and queens. By locking Genevieve away to die, Garrick had unknowingly sealed off the only path to the legitimacy and survival he so desperately craved. And in the shadows of Hemlock Keep, the consequences of his arrogance were already beginning to take root. 6 months passed. The harsh winter gave way to a bleak, muddy spring, but the atmosphere inside Hemlock Keep remained as frigid as ice. High in the North Tower, Genevieve Caldwell survived. The guards, anticipating that the frail Omega would perish within a fortnight from the cold and the meager rations of stale bread and water, were baffled. What they did not know was that the blood of the ancient Lycan kings gave Genevieve a supernatural resilience. Her wolf, though suppressed and denied its mate, was ancient and powerful in its own right. In the crushing solitude of her cell, Genevieve had finally uncovered the truth of her past. A sympathetic old guard named Thomas, who had served in the keep for 50 years, had recognized her violet eyes. Sneaking her extra blankets and scraps of meat, Thomas had whispered the truth through the iron bars. He brought her a crumbling, leather-bound journal that had belonged to her mother, Queen Isadora Whitmore. Reading the pages by the faint light of a single candle, Genevieve learned of her heritage. She was no scullery maid. She was the rightful alpha queen of the northern reaches. But a heavier, more terrifying truth also weighed on her. She was pregnant. During the night of the mating ball, before the brutal rejection, Garrick had cornered her in a secluded hallway. Overwhelmed by the sudden mate bond, they had shared a single, passionate encounter, a moment of primal surrender before Garrick's rational mind and massive ego had regained control. From that brief, intense union, a child had been conceived. A child that carried the brutal strength of Garrick Mercer and the ancient, sacred magic of the Whitmore line. Down in the lower levels of the keep, King Garrick was unraveling. Rejecting a fated mate is a sin against the moon goddess, and nature demands a vicious toll for such a transgression. Garrick was suffering from the alpha's rot. It started as a subtle ache in his bones, followed by uncontrollable tremors in his hands. His inner wolf, denied its other half, was slowly turning rabid, attacking his own mind. He suffered from blinding headaches, violent mood swings, and terrifying hallucinations. He could smell rain-washed jasmine in every room he entered, driving him to tear his chambers apart in frantic, desperate searches for a mate he knew he had condemned. The court whispered of the king's madness. His hold on the throne was slipping. The southern Pax, sensing weakness, had stopped paying their tithes and were amassing an army at the border. Garrick's attempts to awaken the moonstone had failed spectacularly. The relic remained dull and grey, a glaring symbol of his illegitimacy. Lord Edmund Fairchild saw the cracks in the king's armour. Edmund was a brilliant, ambitious beta who had always despised taking orders from a man he considered a mindless brute. He began secretly communicating with the rebel Pax, plotting a coup. But Edmund knew that to claim the throne for himself, he couldn't just kill Garrick. He needed a symbol of legitimacy. Edmund's spies had been busy. They had noticed old Thomas sneaking into the North Tower. They had intercepted the guard, tortured him, and discovered the astonishing truth. The scullery maid was a Whitmore. One stormy night, as thunder shook the stone foundations of Hemlock Keep, the heavy iron door to Genevieve's cell creaked open. It was not Thomas. It was Lord Edmund Fairchild, flanked by two massive rogue mercenaries. Genevieve backed against the damp wall, instinctively wrapping her arms around her slightly swelling abdomen. "Well, well," Edmund purred, stepping into the dim light and inspecting the squalid cell with a sneer of disgust. The lost heir of Whitmore, living like a rat in the rafters. The king truly is a blind, blundering fool. "What do you want, Lord Fairchild?" Genevieve asked, her voice raspy from disuse, but laced with a commanding steel that surprised even herself. Edmund's eyes flicked down to her stomach, his cruel smile widening. "I want the kingdom, Your Grace. Garrick is dying from the rot. His mind is gone, his generals are losing faith, and his reign is at an end. I am going to take his head, but the people love a tragic fairy tale." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "I will rescue the lost queen from her wicked captor. I will marry you, Genevieve. Together, we will activate the moonstone, and your royal blood will secure my crown. And if you refuse," he gestured to the mercenaries, "I will cut that bastard pup from your belly, kill you, and claim I was too late to save you from Garrick's madness." Genevieve's violet eyes blazed in the darkness. The Omega within her, long docile and submissive, violently gave way to the protective fury of a mother and the ancient pride of a queen. She was trapped, unarmed and outnumbered, but she would not let this serpent take her child or her kingdom. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Garrick Mercer awoke from a fever dream with a blood-curdling roar. The Alpha's rot had nearly consumed him, but in that exact moment, a sharp, agonizing spike of pure terror pierced his chest. It was not his terror. It was the mate bond, the frayed, damaged thread connecting his soul to Genevieve's. It flared to life with blinding intensity, screaming that she was in mortal danger. Garrick stumbled out of his bed, his massive chest heaving, sweat pouring down his scarred torso. His golden eyes, clouded with madness for months, suddenly snapped into razor-sharp focus. The wolf within him, dying and desperate, let out a thunderous howl that rattled the very stones of the fortress. For the first time since the night of the ball, Garrick didn't care about his pride, his crown, or the whispers of his court. The only thing that mattered was the scent of rain-washed jasmine, and the sudden, horrifying realization that the woman he had locked away to die was the only thing keeping him alive. He smashed through the heavy oak doors of his bedchamber, ignoring the startled cries of his royal guards, and began to run toward the North Tower, his claws extending as he prepared to slaughter anyone who stood between him and his Omega. But as Edmund's mercenaries lunged forward in the dark cell, the question remained: would the Alpha King reach his rejected mate in time, or had his arrogance finally cost him everything? The heavy iron door of the North Tower cell did not just open. It exploded inward, a tempest of splintered oak and bent metal raining down upon the damp stone floor. Lord Edmund Fairchild spun around, his arrogant sneer instantly dissolving into stark, blood-draining terror. Standing in the ruined archway was Alpha King Garrick, a living embodiment of mythological wrath. His massive chest heaved, covered in a sheen of sweat, and the frantic, pulsing veins of a man pushed beyond the brink of sanity. The Alpha's rot had hollowed his cheeks and painted bruised purple shadows beneath his eyes, but at this moment the madness had crystallized into pure, lethal focus. "Get away from her." Garrick's voice was not human. It was the guttural, vibrating growl of an apex predator whose mate had been threatened. Edmund stumbled backward, seeking refuge behind his two colossal mercenaries, men hardened by years of brutal warfare in the lawless western valleys. "Kill him!" Edmund shrieked, his composure completely shattered. "He is weak! The rot has bled him dry! Gut him now, Carter! Briggs, strike his heart!" Carter, a heavily scarred brute, wielding a serrated blade forged from crude silver, lunged forward. Ordinarily, Garrick would have eviscerated the man in a heartbeat. But the rot had devastated the king's reflexes, leaving his muscles heavy and uncoordinated. Carter's blade sliced through the air, carving a vicious, smoking gash across Garrick's ribs. The smell of burning flesh and searing silver filled the confined cell. Garrick roared, backhanding Carter with enough force to shatter the mercenary's jaw and send him crashing into the stone wall, instantly unconscious. But Briggs was faster. Using Carter's attack as a distraction, Briggs drove a rusted iron dagger deep into Garrick's shoulder, twisting the hilt with a sickening crunch. Genevieve watched the bloodshed with wide, horrified, violet eyes. This was the man who had discarded her to freeze in the dark, the man whose pride had condemned them both. Yet, as Garrick sank to one knee, coughing up dark blood, but still fiercely keeping his body positioned between the mercenaries and her, the ancient dormant mate bond flared to life within her chest. It was a scorching, inescapable heat. "Finish him!" Edmund yelled, drawing a concealed dagger from his velvet doublet. As Briggs raised his blade for the killing blow, something inside Genevieve snapped. The submissive, terrified Omega that society had forced her to be dissolved into dust. In her place, the ancient bloodline of the Whitmore Queens awoke, summoned by the desperate need to protect her unborn child and her dying mate. A sound tore from Genevieve's throat, not a scream, but a commanding, earth-shattering frequency that made the very air in the tower vibrate. Her eyes flared with blinding, luminescent violet light. Briggs froze, his arm locked in mid-air, suddenly unable to breathe. The oppressive, dominating aura of a true royal alpha slammed into the room, heavy enough to crack the stone floor. It was a power unseen in the northern reaches for generations, a genetic memory of absolute submission that brought every wolf to their knees. Even Edmund, A high-ranking beta collapsed onto the floor, clutching his throat, his eyes wide with a terror he could not comprehend. Garrick, though agonizingly weak, looked up through the haze of pain. He stared at the frail, soot-stained woman he had cast aside. The violet light in her eyes was no peasant's mutation. It was the mark of the sacred sovereigns. And then, as the chaotic scent of blood and sweat settled, Garrick's heightened senses caught the undeniable, terrifyingly beautiful scent of his own bloodline blooming within her. "You're—" Garrick rasped, the revelation crashing over him like an avalanche. "You carry my pup." Genevieve did not soften her gaze. She stepped around the paralyzingly terrified Briggs and looked down at the king. "I carry the heir of Whitmore," she corrected, her voice echoing with a haunting, ethereal resonance. "And you, Garrick Mercer, have nearly doomed us all." Edmund, seizing a momentary lapse in the oppressive aura as Genevieve focused on Garrick, scrambled like a cornered rat. He scrambled over the debris, bolting down the spiraling staircase of the tower, screaming for his treasonous guards. "We have to move," Genevieve said, the supernatural glow fading from her eyes, leaving her swaying with exhaustion. Using such power while pregnant was a dangerous drain on her body. She reached down, offering her scarred, delicate hand to the massive, bleeding alpha. Garrick stared at her hand, as if he were entirely unworthy to touch it. The immense weight of his arrogance, his cruelty, and his catastrophic mistakes crushed him. He had locked his salvation in a cage. But as the distant sound of Edmund's armored guards echoing up the stairs reached them, Garrick forced himself to his feet, ignoring the agonizing burn of the silver in his side. "I will hold them back," Garrick breathed, his golden eyes filled with a desperate, tragic resolve. "You must run, Genevieve. Flee to the southern woods. Find General Arthur Wellesley and Lady Eleanor Talbot. They were loyal to your mother's line. They will protect you." Genevieve grabbed his uninjured arm, her grip surprisingly ironclad. "If you stay, you die. And if you die, the bond will shatter my mind and kill the child. I will not let you take the easy way out, Garrick. You are going to fix this." "How?" he groaned, leaning heavily against the stone wall. "I am ruined. The rot is taking my mind, and my court has turned against me." "The moonstone," Genevieve commanded, pulling him toward the servants' passageway, hidden behind a rotting tapestry. "Take me to the catacombs." The descent into the catacombs of Hemlock Keep was a nightmare of blood, shadows, and failing strength. Garrick was deteriorating rapidly. The silver in his bloodstream was poisoning his wolf, and the alpha's rot, exacerbated by the physical trauma, was causing severe hallucinations. He leaned heavily on Genevieve, his massive frame nearly crushing her, yet she refused to let him fall. They navigated the labyrinthine tunnels built centuries ago by the first Lichen Kings. Behind them, they could hear the relentless pursuit of Lord Edmund Fairchild and his loyalists, their torches flickering against the damp stone walls, their voices echoing with murderous intent. Edmund knew that if they reached the relic, his coup was over. "Why?" Garrick whispered as they stumbled down a darkened flight of stairs, his voice barely a rasp. "Why do you help me? I left you to starve. I shamed you before the entire realm. I am a monster." "You are a fool," Genevieve corrected sharply, though her hands were gentle as she adjusted her grip on his waist. "A proud, blind fool who thought power was found in cruelty." But you are also my mate, and the father of my child. The goddess bound us together for a reason, Garrick, to unite the strength of the new age with the blood of the old. They reached the colossal iron doors of the royal sanctum. With a final agonizing effort, Garrick pushed against the heavy iron, forcing the doors open to reveal the cavernous chamber. In the center of the room, resting atop a dais of black obsidian, sat the moonstone. It was a massive uncut crystal, currently dull and lifeless, resembling a chunk of dirty ice. This was the relic that had remained dormant for over a century, refusing to acknowledge any of the warlords who had claimed leadership of the northern reaches. "There they are! Tear them apart!" Genevieve spun around. Edmund Fairchild stood at the entrance of the chamber, backed by a dozen heavily armed guards. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, desperate hatred. "The king is dead. Slay the Omega and the crown is mine." Garrick tried to step in front of Genevieve, to offer his life as a shield, but his legs finally gave out. He collapsed onto the cold stone floor, blood pooling beneath him, his breathing shallow and ragged. "No more hiding," Genevieve whispered to herself. She walked past Garrick, stepping up onto the obsidian dais. She did not look at Edmund or his men. She looked only at the stone. Drawing a small, jagged piece of flint she had kept from her cell, she sliced the palm of her hand. "Stop her!" Edmund screamed, raising a crossbow. Before the bolt could fly, Genevieve pressed her bleeding palm against the cold surface of the moonstone. For a fraction of a second, the world went completely silent. Then an explosive shockwave of pure, blinding silver light erupted from the crystal. The force of the magic was catastrophic, throwing Edmund and his guards backward, pinning them to the cavern walls as if pressed by the hands of giants. The light cascaded through the room, flooding into the dark corners of the catacombs, shooting up through the stone floors of Hemlock Keep and bursting out of the fortress towers into the stormy night sky. It was a beacon that could be seen for hundreds of miles, a definitive, undeniable declaration to every pack in the realm. The true sovereign had returned. The silver magic rushed from the stone into Genevieve, wrapping around her in a luminous halo. But she did not keep the power for herself. She directed it through the mate bond, straight into the dying man on the floor. Garrick gasped. The silver light flooded his veins, immediately dissolving the silver poison that was killing him. But more profoundly, it washed away the Alpha's rot. The chaotic, rabid madness that had plagued his mind for months evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, overwhelming clarity. The severed connection between his soul and his mate was forged anew, reinforced by the ancient magic of the moonstone. He felt her power. He felt her grace. He felt the immense, terrifying love of the woman he had wronged. Garrick rose to his feet. He was no longer the hunched, dying brute of a few moments ago. He stood taller, his golden eyes glowing with a renewed, divine authority granted to him not by conquest, but by the queen who had chosen to save him. Edmund, terrified and trembling, dropped his crossbow. The rebel guards immediately fell to their knees, baring their necks in absolute submission to the blinding aura of the true royal pair. Garrick walked over to Edmund, his footsteps echoing like thunder in the silent, glowing chamber. He did not speak. He simply reached down, grabbed the treacherous lord by the collar of his doublet, and effortlessly hurled him across the room, leaving him bruised, broken, and defeated at the feet of the royal guards, who were now pouring into the chamber, drawn by the light. General Arthur Wellesley and Lady Eleanor Talbot leading the true loyalists of the court, rushed into the sanctum. They stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes widening at the sight of the glowing moonstone and the radiant Omega standing before it. Garrick turned his back on the traitors and the court. He walked toward the dais, stopping at the base of the obsidian steps. Slowly, deliberately, the massive Alpha King sank to his knees, bowing his head before a scullery maid. "I was blind," Garrick's voice rang out, clear and steady, filled with absolute reverence. "I sought power, and in my ignorance, I locked away the very soul of this kingdom. You are the rightful ruler of the northern reaches. You are my mate. You are my salvation. I surrender my life, my crown, and my heart to you. Genevieve Whitmore." A stunned silence fell over the gathered nobility. To see the most brutal warlord in a century kneeling before an Omega was a paradigm shift that would alter the course of their history forever. Genevieve descended the steps, the light of the moonstone fading to a warm, constant glow. She placed her healed, gentle hand beneath Garrick's chin and lifted his head, forcing him to meet her violet eyes. "You will not surrender your crown, Garrick," Genevieve said softly, yet loud enough for the entire court to hear. "A kingdom cannot stand on one leg. We will rule this realm together. Not with cruelty, not with iron, but with the strength of the bond you once tried to break." Garrick closed his eyes, a single tear escaping to track down his scarred cheek as he leaned into her touch. The scent of rain-washed jasmine and sweet cedar filled his senses, no longer a haunting phantom, but a solid, beautiful reality. The Alpha King had locked his Omega away to die in the dark, but in the end, she had dragged him into the light. From the ashes of his arrogance, a new dynasty was born, one that would echo through the annals of time, proving that the truest power of a king lies solely in the mercy of his queen. Did the twists in Genevieve and Garrick's story keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this tale of betrayal, ancient bloodlines, and ultimate redemption, be sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more epic, dramatic stories. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the King's brutal mistake and the Omega's fierce revenge. See you next time.